Hello and welcome to Voice of Women. Today, I want to share an incredible story about a woman named Eleanor. 6 months after her husband was declared dead, she discovered a message that turned her entire world upside down. Secrets, lies, and danger lurk at every corner. You won't believe what happened next. Stay with us because this is a story you have to hear.
Sometimes I look at my hands, these hands that have held so much, a baby's tiny fingers, a teacup clinking against a saucer at a charity luncheon, my husband's strong, warm hand in mine. And I think, how can these same hands still be here doing the mundane when everything else is a shattered mosaic? 55 years, a lifetime, they say. But what kind of life is it when the very ground you walk on turns out to be quicksand? It started, I suppose, with the rain. It always seems to rain in my most vivid memories, doesn't it? That day, it wasn't just rain, it was a deluge, a proper biblical downpour that hammered against the windows of the manor, blurring the ancient oaks into a watercolor smear. Thomas had been out, of course, always out, always busy. A man of his stature, his reach, he called it, couldn't be confined by a little thing like a storm. He was on his way back from a meeting in the city, something about the latest philanthropic venture, or perhaps a new investment opportunity. Our world, you see, revolved around a certain kind of careful, elegant dance. Dinners, galas, board meetings, discreet conversations, and hushed tones over expensive scotch. We were at the very heart of it all, respected, admired, trusted, or so I thought. The phone rang just as I was considering whether to light the drawing room fire. A trivial thought, isn't it, in retrospect? Fire or no fire. The crackle of logs, the scent of burning oak, small comforting things. The call came from Inspector Davies. I remember the name distinctly, the way it rolled off his tongue, heavy and official. He didn't mince words. There had been an accident, a terrible accident. A collision on the old coastal road near Blackwood's End. Thomas's car. It had gone over the cliff. I remember thinking, no, that can't be right. Thomas was an excellent driver, cautious, always. He'd navigated mountain passes in the Alps and treacherous city streets with the same calm precision. Over a cliff, in a storm, it sounded theatrical. But then Davies's voice, devoid of any embellishment, just the facts, the bleak, unyielding facts. The car was mangled beyond recognition. A recovery operation was underway, but due to the tide and the sheer drop, it wasn't looking good. My knees buckled. I sank onto the antique Persian rug, the one Thomas had brought back from a trip to Istanbul, its intricate patterns now a blurry swirl beneath my tear-filled eyes. The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering against the polished oak floorboards. The line went dead. And in that silence, broken only by the incessant drumming of rain, my world ended. Or so I believed. The next few days were a blur of hushed voices, solemn faces, and the suffocating scent of lilies. Our home, usually a vibrant hub of activity, became a mausoleum. Friends, acquaintances, business associates, they all came to offer condolences, to express shock, to stand with me in silent solidarity. There was Margaret, my oldest friend, her eyes red-rimmed, her hand squeezing mine so tight I thought my bones would crack. "Oh, darling," she'd whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "I'm so terribly, terribly sorry." And Robert, Thomas's business partner, looking utterly bereft, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by a grim, drawn expression. He spoke of Thomas's brilliance, his generosity, his unwavering integrity. Everyone did. Everyone spoke of him as a titan, a man who built empires and lifted communities. The police, they were sympathetic, professional. They did their due diligence, questioned me gently, asked about Thomas's last movements, his mood, any enemies he might have had. Enemies? Thomas? It seemed preposterous. He was universally liked, respected. He had a way of charming anyone, of making them feel important, valued. I told them as much. They nodded, wrote it down. They searched the wreckage, what little remained of it. They found his wallet, his watch, the gold one I'd given him for his 50th, and some fragments of his clothes, his favorite tweed jacket, a silk tie, but no body. The ocean, Mrs. Davenport, Inspector Davies had explained, his voice softer now, tinged with a reluctant sympathy, is a powerful force. Especially in conditions like that. We've done all we can, but it's unlikely we'll ever recover him. He spoke of currents, of the sheer force of impact, of the vastness of the sea. Each word was a nail in the coffin of my hope, a confirmation of a terrifying truth. And so it was settled. Thomas Davenport, my husband of 30 years, was dead. Lost to the sea. The news spread like wildfire through our social circles. The outpouring of grief was immense. I remember the funeral, a grand affair at St. Jude's. The church was overflowing. People from all walks of life, from the city's mayor to the gardeners who tended our estate, came to pay their respects. I stood there, a widow in black, a fragile figure clinging to the arm of our son James. James, bless his heart, tried to be strong for me, but I could see the raw pain in his young eyes. He adored his father. We all did. I delivered the eulogy. My voice, surprisingly steady, spoke of Thomas's kindness, his vision, his unwavering love for his family. I spoke of our life together, the laughter, the quiet evenings by the fire, the adventures we'd shared. It was a beautiful tribute, if I do say so myself, and I meant every word, every single one, because at that moment, I believed it with every fiber of my being. I was grieving a man I loved, a man who was gone forever. The weight of that loss was a physical burden, pressing down on my chest, making every breath an effort. The weeks that followed were a fog of well-meaning visitors, casseroles I couldn't eat, and the crushing weight of silence in the house. Every corner held a memory of him. His scent lingered in his study, a mix of old books, pipe tobacco, and his specific cologne. His slippers still sat by the armchair as if waiting for him to step into them. I'd walk past his side of the bed and feel a phantom chill, a hollow space where his warmth should have been. I cried. Oh, how I cried. Silent tears that streamed down my face in the dead of night and racking sobs that shook my entire body when I thought no one was listening. The loneliness was a palpable entity, a cold hand squeezing my heart. James was a rock. He took over the reins of the family business, stepped into his father's shoes with a maturity beyond his 28 years. He made sure I ate, that I slept, that I didn't completely disappear into my grief. He'd sit with me in the evenings, just talking, or sometimes in companionable silence. He'd inherited Thomas's strength, his quiet determination. And for that, I was eternally grateful. He was the one anchor in a world that felt adrift. Life, as they say, goes on. But it wasn't life as I knew it. It was a muted, colorless existence. The vibrant hues of my world had been washed out, leaving behind only shades of gray. I tried to find solace in my hobbies, in my charitable work, but my heart wasn't in it. Every smile felt forced, every conversation a performance. I was wearing a mask of composure, but beneath it, I was bleeding. I'd attend the usual social engagements, the art auctions and gala dinners, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying memories, searching for meaning in the aftermath of a tragedy. The polite chatter of our social circle, once a comfort, now felt like a meaningless drone. Then came the first crack in the facade. It was about 6 months after the funeral. I was in Thomas's study, sifting through some old papers James had asked me to look at. Tax documents, investment portfolios, the dull but necessary detritus of a wealthy life. I wasn't really paying attention, just moving things from one pile to another, trying to make sense of the sheer volume of his affairs. He'd always handled everything, meticulously, brilliantly. I was more of the socialite, the hostess, the aesthetic complement to his formidable intellect. A comfortable arrangement, I'd always thought. I picked up a leather-bound journal, one he used for his more private thoughts, his musings on philosophy or literature. I'd seen it before, but never read it. It felt too intrusive. But now it was just another relic of a life lost. I flipped through the pages, seeing his elegant flowing script. The scent of old paper and leather filled my nostrils. Then, tucked between 2 pages, a small folded piece of paper fluttered out. It was a plain white slip, the kind you'd get from a printer, and on it, typed in a simple sans serif font, were 5 words. I am alive. Trust no one. My breath hitched. My heart slammed against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Alive. It couldn't be. It was a cruel joke. a phantom limb of my grief playing tricks on my mind. I stared at the words, willing them to change, to dissolve into meaninglessness, but they remained, stark and unwavering. The paper felt cool in my trembling fingers. It wasn't old, not yellowed with age like the journal pages. It looked fresh, as if it had been placed there recently, perhaps even after his disappearance. I felt a sudden, dizzying wave of nausea. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. A prank? A sick joke by some disgruntled former employee? But who would do such a thing, and why? And then the chilling thought, what if it's true? What if the man I'd mourned, the man I'd eulogized, was still breathing, still existing somewhere out there? The idea was both a terrifying hope and a profound new source of anguish. I snatched up the phone, my hand shaking so violently I almost dropped it. I had to call James. He would know what to do. He would tell me I was imagining things, that grief was making me irrational. But as my finger hovered over his number, another thought, cold and insidious, snaked its way into my mind. Trust no one. Those words. They echoed in the quiet of the study, loud and clear. No one. Did that include James? No, of course not. James was my son. He loved his father. He was grieving too. But what if this was part of something bigger, something I couldn't even fathom, a conspiracy so vast that even my own son could be unwittingly entangled? The very thought was a betrayal of everything I believed in. I put the phone down, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and terror. If Thomas was alive, why would he send me such a cryptic message? Why wouldn't he just come home, walk through the front door, and embrace us? And who was I not to trust? The world I thought I knew, the safe, predictable world built on money and reputation and old friendships, suddenly felt like a house of cards teetering on the edge of collapse. The very air in the study, once a place of comfort and intellectual pursuit, now felt heavy with unspoken secrets. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into the pocket of my dressing gown. I couldn't leave it there. Someone might find it. Someone might see it. The paranoia had already begun to set in. The idea that someone was watching, someone knew, someone was involved. It was a chilling sensation, like an invisible hand pressing down on my chest, stealing my breath. For days, I walked around in a daze, the note a burning secret in my pocket. It felt like a physical weight, a hidden burden that separated me from everyone around me. I watched James, scrutinizing his every move, every word. Was there a subtle shift in his gaze? A tremor in his voice? Was his grief too perfect, too performative? I hated myself for even thinking such things about my own son, but the words trust no one had planted a seed of suspicion that was quickly blossoming into a monstrous thorny vine, choking out all reason and love. I started to re-examine everything, every conversation, every interaction since the accident. Robert, Thomas's partner, he'd seemed so genuinely heartbroken. He'd handled the immediate aftermath of Thomas's death with such quiet competence, stepping in to manage the business, offering me unwavering support. But then he also stood to gain a great deal from Thomas's death, didn't he? A larger share of the business, undisputed control, a position of unparalleled power in the city's financial landscape. No, that was a monstrous thought. Robert was a family friend. He'd been at our wedding. He'd bounced James on his knee as a baby. He'd shared countless meals and holidays with us. This couldn't be him. The more I thought, the more the memories started to twist, to curdle. Little things. Thomas's sudden, secretive trips in the months leading up to the accident. He'd always been busy, but there was a new intensity to it, a guardedness that I'd attributed to the pressures of his work. He'd often seemed preoccupied, his gaze distant, his mind clearly elsewhere, even when he was with me. I'd brushed it off as stress, the demands of his ambitious nature. Now it felt like something else entirely, something hidden and unsettling. I remembered a conversation with Margaret shortly after the funeral. We were having tea in the conservatory, the afternoon sun streaming through the glass, trying to bring a semblance of warmth back into my life. She was comforting me, telling me how strong I was, how much Thomas had loved me. Then, almost as an aside, she'd said, her voice dropping slightly, Thomas was under a lot of pressure, Eleanor, more than any of us knew. Business, you know how it is. He was really wrestling with something big, I could tell. I nodded, too numb to truly absorb her words at the time, dismissing it as the usual stresses of a powerful man. But now they echoed in my mind, more than any of us knew. What exactly did she mean by that? And why had she mentioned it so casually, as if it were a common observation rather than a subtle warning? I started spending hours in Thomas's study again, not just sifting, but truly looking. I opened every drawer, every compartment. I examined his desk calendar, his diaries, the meticulously organized files. I was searching for clues, for anything that would either confirm my horrifying suspicion or put it to rest. I felt like a detective in my own life, a life that had suddenly become a twisted mystery novel, and I, the unsuspecting protagonist, was finally starting to read between the lines. The very act of touching his things, of smelling his lingering scent, was a torturous dance between longing and dread. One evening, I found myself drawn to his personal safe hidden behind a false panel in the wall, concealed by a heavy tapestry depicting a hunting scene. He'd shown me the combination years ago, but I'd rarely had cause to use it. It held only our most sensitive legal documents, the original wills, birth certificates, and a few family heirlooms. Now my fingers fumbled with the dial, the numbers clicking into place with a series of metallic whispers. The heavy steel door swung open with a soft sigh, revealing a dark, cool interior. Inside, nestled among legal documents and a few precious family heirlooms, was a small, unmarked envelope. It stood out almost deliberately against the otherwise neatly organized contents. My heart hammered again. This was it. I just knew it. I pulled it out, my hands trembling. It was sealed with a plain wax seal, not Thomas's usual signet. No return address. Just my name, written in what looked like Thomas's distinctive hand. But it was an older envelope. The paper was slightly yellowed, the edges softened with time. I tore it open, my breath held captive in my lungs. Inside were photographs, not of us, not family pictures, not the charming landscapes he sometimes took. These were aerial shots, grainy and slightly out of focus, of what looked like a sprawling industrial complex nestled far from the city in a desolate, heavily guarded area. And alongside them, a series of documents, financial statements, intricate diagrams, blueprints of some kind, and a series of names I recognized, names of prominent figures in the city, business rivals, political allies, and then a name that made the blood drain from my face, Robert Sterling. He was there in the documents linked to something called Project Chimera. There were complex financial transactions, shell corporations, offshore accounts, a labyrinthine network of money transfers that made my head spin. It was a web, intricate and sinister, that pointed to what? Fraud? Embezzlement? Something far more dangerous, something that hinted at illicit manufacturing or illegal trade. The sheer scale of it was mind-boggling, a stark contrast to the benevolent public image Thomas had cultivated. The more I read, the clearer it became. Thomas wasn't just a philanthropist. He was involved in something murky, something illicit, something deeply criminal, and Robert, his trusted partner, was right there with him, a key player in this monstrous scheme. My husband, the man I loved, the man everyone admired, the paragon of integrity, was a con artist, a deceiver. And he had faked his own death. The sheer audacity of it, the cold calculation, made my blood run cold. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The grief, the utter desolation I had felt was a cruel joke. He had orchestrated it all. The car accident, the missing body, the police investigation, it was all a meticulously planned performance, a grand deception designed to fool the world. And I, his devoted wife, was the primary audience, a fool in mourning. I felt a surge of white-hot anger, so intense it almost choked me. How could he? How could he put me through that? How could he let our son grieve for a father who was still alive? The betrayal was so profound, so utterly devastating that it eclipsed even the fear. This wasn't just about money. This was about a fundamental rupture in my reality, a complete shattering of trust, a desecration of our shared history. 30 years of my life, seemingly built on a foundation of love and honesty, now felt like a meticulously crafted illusion. But then the fear crept back in, slithering into the corners of my mind. Trust no one. If Thomas was involved in something so deep, something that required him to disappear, then what kind of danger was I in now that I knew? What if these documents were themselves a trap? What if simply possessing them made me a target? I gathered the documents and the photographs, my hands still shaking, the paper feeling heavy with its terrible truth. I couldn't leave them in the safe. Not now. Someone might search it. Someone might already know about them. I needed to hide them somewhere safe, somewhere no one would ever think to look. My mind, usually so composed and practical, was now a whirlwind of paranoid thoughts. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking figure, every creak of the floorboards a hidden listener, every distant car engine a potential threat. I remembered an old jewelry box, a gift from my grandmother, a beautiful, intricately carved wooden box that was now empty. It was hidden deep in the attic, tucked away in an old trunk of forgotten linens, beneath moth-eaten blankets and childhood toys. It was perfect, obscure, out of sight, and unlikely to be disturbed by anyone. I hurried upstairs, my heart still thudding against my ribs, the documents clutched tight in my hand, my senses heightened to every sound, every movement in the silent house. The next few days were excruciating. I had to maintain the facade of the grieving widow, the woman slowly piecing her life back together, finding strength in her sorrow. But inside, I was screaming. Every smile, every polite conversation, every nod of understanding from friends and acquaintances felt like a performance of monumental proportions, an exhausting charade. I watched Robert with new eyes. His expressions, his gestures, his words, they all seemed to hold a hidden meaning now, a subtle insincerity I hadn't noticed before. When he'd come over to discuss the future of the company, his voice smooth and reassuring, his hand occasionally resting on my arm in a gesture of paternal comfort, I saw a predator in fine clothing, a wolf in sheep's attire, calculating his next move. I also observed James more closely. He was so earnest, so dedicated to upholding his father's legacy, so eager to step into his shoes. He spoke of Thomas with such reverence, such profound love and admiration. It broke my heart to think that he too was a victim of this elaborate deception, that his grief was for a phantom, a living father who chose to remain hidden. Did he know anything? Could he be involved, even unwittingly? The words "trust no one" whispered in my mind, a constant chilling refrain, forcing me to question even my own son. I had to be careful. I couldn't go to the police. Not yet. If Thomas was involved in something illegal, something on this scale, then alerting the authorities could put both of us, and potentially James, in even greater danger. What if the police were involved? What if the whole system was compromised, bought, and paid for by these shadowy figures? The thought was terrifying, a fundamental erosion of everything I'd believed about law and order. I started to delve deeper into the documents I'd found. Late at night, when the house was silent and the world outside was asleep, when the only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, I would pull them out from their hiding place, spread them across the dining room table, and pore over them. The names, the dates, the offshore accounts, the elaborate flowcharts of money moving through various shell corporations. It was like learning a new language, a language of deception and illicit dealings, a dark lexicon of financial manipulation. Project Chimera. The name itself sounded sinister, evocative of something created in secret, something monstrous. I remembered Thomas's charm, his ability to win people over, to make them feel heard, understood, appreciated. He could make you believe anything, make you trust him implicitly. Was it all a lie? Our entire marriage? Our shared history? Was I just another mark in his grand scheme, albeit the most important one? The thought was unbearable, a sharp, searing pain in my chest. 30 years, a lifetime of shared moments, of intimacy, of building a family. Had it all been a performance? Had our love been a meticulously crafted act designed to give him an unassailable cover? Then a new detail emerged from the pile of papers, almost hidden in plain sight. a series of coded messages scrawled in the margins of one of the financial reports, disguised as mundane annotations. I recognized Thomas's handwriting, but the symbols were alien to me, a jumble of letters and numbers that seemed to have no discernible pattern. I spent hours trying to decipher them, poring over old books on cryptography I found in his study, searching online forums, even trying simple substitution ciphers I remembered from childhood games. Nothing. It was a private code meant only for those in the know, a secret language shared between conspirators. But then I remembered something. Thomas had a quirky habit. When he was particularly stressed or preoccupied, when his mind was churning with complex problems, he would often doodle in a specific way. A series of interconnected circles, almost like a chain, a continuous loop of thoughts. And there it was in the margin of the document, a tiny, almost imperceptible chain of circles next to one of the coded messages. It was a clue, a breadcrumb trail left by the master illusionist himself, a tiny whisper from the ghost of my husband. I remembered a book he'd often read, a classic espionage novel from his youth, a battered copy of The 39 Steps by John Buchan. He'd loved it, often quoting passages from it, talking about the cleverness of its protagonist, the subtle ways he uncovered secrets. I retrieved it from his bookshelf, its pages worn and dog-eared from countless readings. I flipped through it, searching for anything, any obscure reference, any hidden message. And then I found it. A passage underlined, a simple substitution cipher described in the text, a Vigenère cipher, its keys subtly hinted at in a philosophical quotation he'd underlined years ago. My heart pounded. Could it be? Could he have been so meticulously clever, so subtly devious? I painstakingly applied the cipher to the coded message, using the key from the book, letter by letter, symbol by symbol. It was slow, laborious work, my mind racing with a mix of dread and exhilaration, each successful decryption feeling like a tiny victory against the overwhelming tide of confusion. And then the words began to emerge, forming a coherent sentence, a stark message from the man who was supposed to be dead, a location, a date, and a time. Old Boathouse, July 14th, midnight. Today was July 12th. I had 2 days. 2 days to decide what to do, 2 days to confront the truth, whatever it might be, 2 days to step out of the shadows of my grief and into the dangerous unknown. The old boathouse, it was a dilapidated structure on the far side of the estate, nestled deep in the woods along the riverbank. We hadn't used it in years. It was overgrown with ivy and wild roses, its wooden planks rotting, the roof partially collapsed. It was a forgotten place, a relic of a past when Thomas had enjoyed sailing on the river. The perfect clandestine meeting place, obscure, secluded, and unlikely to draw any attention. The thought of going there, of potentially seeing Thomas, filled me with a complex cocktail of emotions. Relief that he was alive, yes, a profound, almost overwhelming sense of that. But also a simmering rage, a profound sense of betrayal that had curdled into something bitter, and fear. Unadulterated, bone-chilling fear. What if this was a trap? What if he was bringing me into his dangerous world? A world I knew nothing about, a world that could swallow me whole. I couldn't tell James. Not yet. He was too innocent, too trusting, too much like the Thomas I thought I knew. And if Thomas was truly involved in something dangerous, something that could harm him, then James needed to be kept out of it, protected at all costs. Trust no one. The words echoed again, a constant warning, forcing me to build walls, even against the people I loved most. The next 2 days were a blur of nervous anticipation, a heightened state of anxiety that buzzed beneath my skin. Went through the motions of my daily life, hosting a small luncheon for the garden club, attending a charity committee meeting, overseeing the household staff, but my mind was 1,000 miles away, replaying scenarios, imagining conversations, trying to prepare myself for what was to come. I tried to appear normal, to maintain my composure, but I knew my eyes held a haunted look, a desperate edge that I hoped no one would notice. I saw my reflection in a mirror and barely recognized the tense, strained face looking back at me. I found myself meticulously planning, trying to control the uncontrollable. I needed a way to protect myself. I retrieved a small pearl-handled revolver from Thomas's locked drawer in his dressing room, a relic from his hunting days that I'd never imagined I'd have cause to use. It felt cold and heavy in my hand, surprisingly weighty, a symbol of the desperate situation I found myself in, a grim reassurance. I also packed a small bag with a change of clothes, some cash I'd discreetly withdrawn from my personal account, and my passport, just in case I needed to disappear just as he had, just in case the consequences of this meeting were dire. On the evening of July 14th, I feigned a sudden migraine and retired to my room early, sending word to James that I wasn't feeling well and wouldn't be down for dinner. I waited until the house was completely silent, the last light extinguished, the soft snores of the housekeeper echoing from downstairs, the only sounds the creaking of the old house. Then, I dressed in dark clothing, practical and unadorned, slipped on comfortable, sturdy walking shoes, and retrieved the gun from its hiding place beneath a loose floorboard in my closet. The night was moonless, the sky a velvet canvas devoid of stars, adding to the oppressive sense of foreboding. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine needles from the surrounding woods, mingled with the faint, sweet perfume of night-blooming jasmine from the garden. A chill wind rustled through the ancient trees, making them whisper like conspirators, their branches swaying ominously. I moved silently through the gardens, past the manicured lawns and blooming roses, my footsteps muffled by the soft grass, towards the shadowy depths of the woods that bordered our property. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the faint, narrow beam of my small flashlight. The path to the boathouse was overgrown, tangled with brambles and thorny vines that snagged at my clothing. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the night, amplified by my own racing thoughts. Every snapping twig, every rustle in the undergrowth, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of adrenaline through me, making me jump, my senses on high alert. I gripped the revolver tighter, my knuckles white, the cold metal a familiar weight in my hand. Finally, the dilapidated structure of the boathouse emerged from the gloom, a skeletal silhouette against the inky blackness, looking more like a forgotten ruin than a functional building. The wooden walls were rotting, warped by years of neglect. The roof partially collapsed, allowing patches of the dark sky to peek through like missing teeth. It looked like a ghost, a forgotten relic of a bygone era, abandoned and forgotten. I paused at the entrance, my breath held captive in my lungs, listening. The air inside was heavy with the smell of stagnant water, decaying wood, and something else, something metallic, faintly acrid, like old oil or damp concrete. A shiver ran down my spine, independent of the chill in the air. This place felt tainted. "Thomas?" I whispered, my voice barely audible above the chirping of crickets and the distant murmur of the river. Silence. Only the faint lapping of the river against the shore, a soft, hypnotic sound that did little to calm my frayed nerves. I stepped inside, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating swirling dust motes that danced in the light like tiny ethereal spirits. Cobwebs clung to the rafters, shimmering faintly. The old wooden boat, covered in a thick layer of dust and draped in more cobwebs, looked like a sleeping leviathan, forgotten and inert. And then a sound. A soft scraping coming from the far end of the boathouse near the old storage locker, hidden beneath a pile of rotting fishing nets. My hand instinctively tightened on the gun, bringing it up, pointing it in the direction of the sound. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice stronger now, laced with a tremor of fear, but tinged with a desperate need for answers. A figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the weak beam of my flashlight. Tall. Familiar. My blood ran cold, a mix of recognition and profound shock. It was Thomas. But not the Thomas I remembered. His clothes were worn, a practical nondescript jacket and trousers, his expensive tailored suits replaced by something rougher. His face was etched with new lines of fatigue and worry, deeper than I'd ever seen, his usually immaculate hair longer, slightly disheveled, streaked with more gray than before. He looked haunted, like a man who had seen too much, been through too much. His eyes, though, were still the same, a piercing blue that held a familiar intensity, but also a deep weariness. He held up his hands, a gesture of peace, but also of surrender, acknowledging the weapon in my grip. Eleanor, he whispered, his voice hoarse, ravaged, as if he hadn't spoken in days, or perhaps hadn't dared to. You came. My anger, simmering beneath the surface for weeks, a volcano dormant but ready to erupt, suddenly erupted. The fear, the betrayal, the grief, it all coalesced into a furious torrent. You bastard, I hissed, tears springing to my eyes, hot and stinging. You absolute bastard! How could you? How could you put me through this? Through all of it? The funeral, the mourning, the endless sympathy from people who thought I was a widow? How could you let James believe his father was dead? He flinched, his eyes filled with a pain that looked almost genuine, almost mirroring my own. Eleanor, please, listen to me. There wasn't any other way. No other way. I scoffed, a bitter, humorless laugh escaping my lips, echoing eerily in the confined space. No other way to let me grieve your death? To let James believe his father was gone forever? What kind of monster does that, Thomas? What kind of husband? What kind of father? A monster trying to protect his family, he said, his voice low and urgent, his gaze never leaving mine. He took a hesitant step towards me, and I instinctively raised the revolver, my hand steady despite the tremors running through my body, pointing it directly at his chest, at the heart of the man who had shattered mine. Don't come any closer, I warned, my voice trembling but firm. Explain yourself. Everything. No more lies, Thomas. Not one. He stopped, his gaze fixed on the gun in my hand, acknowledging the very real threat it represented. It's complicated, Eleanor, more complicated than you can imagine. The note, did you get it? Trust no one. I did, I said, my voice cold, a sharp shard of ice. And now I know why. Because you're a liar, Thomas, a fraud, a criminal, all of it. Our life, our wealth, was it all built on lies? He sighed, a heavy, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of years of secrets. Yes, I was. We were. Robert and I, it started small, innocent enough, a minor indiscretion, a few questionable investments, a little creative accounting to bypass some regulations, to gain an edge. It was always about staying ahead, about securing our position, but then it spiraled. Project Chimera. It became something monstrous, something beyond our control, a web of embezzlement, money laundering, extortion, even whispers of human trafficking. We were involved with some very dangerous people, Eleanor, people who wouldn't hesitate to silence anyone who stood in their way, anyone who threatened to expose them. They had infiltrated every level of power, every institution. My mind reeled, struggling to comprehend the scale of the revelation. Embezzlement, extortion, human trafficking. This was far beyond anything I had imagined, far more heinous than simple fraud. Our life, our wealth, the very foundation of our existence was built on such a dark, blood-stained foundation. The gilded cage I had lived in was, in fact, a prison of secrets. And you decided to fake your death? I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm, laced with incredulity. To escape, to leave me to pick up the pieces, to face the scandal, the ruin, the fallout.
No,
He said, his eyes pleading, filled with a desperate earnestness.
not to escape, to expose them, to bring them down. I gathered evidence, Eleanor, everything. The financial records, the names, the offshore accounts, the connections to politicians and judges. It was all meticulously documented, hidden in layers of code and misdirection.
But I couldn't just go to the authorities directly. These people, they have connections everywhere, Eleanor. High up in government, in law enforcement, in the judiciary. They would have discredited me, twisted the narrative, or worse. They would have come after you, after James. I had to disappear, to become a ghost, to fade from existence, so I could work in the shadows, unhindered, to gather enough undeniable proof to bring them down. The pieces clicked into place, a horrifying mosaic of betrayal and greed, but also of a desperate, twisted self-preservation. Robert, my friend, my confidante, had been playing me all along. His sympathy, his condolences, his unwavering support after Thomas's supposed death, it was all a performance, a carefully crafted act to throw me off the scent, to allow him to consolidate his own power within the criminal enterprise. So the car accident was it staged. He nodded slowly, a grim expression on his face. Every detail was meticulously planned. The old coastal road, notoriously dangerous in bad weather, the sudden violent storm making visibility impossible and recovery operations nearly impossible. It was all planned to appear as a tragic, unavoidable accident. I had help, a contact within the police force, someone who owed me a favor, someone who understood the risks and the stakes. He ensured the wreckage was found, the clothes identified, but no body. It made it plausible. The sheer force of the ocean washing me away, never to be found. And Robert? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, a tremor running through me. Is he in on it? The exposure? Is he helping you? Thomas shook his head, a look of profound regret and disgust on his face. Robert is deep in it, Eleanor. He's one of them, one of the architects of Project Chimera. He's the one I'm trying to bring down, the man who ultimately orchestrated my disappearance, believing I was gone for good. He's far more ruthless than you can imagine, Eleanor. He always was beneath that charming facade, that polished exterior. He saw an opportunity when I disappeared to seize complete control, to liquidate assets, to erase loose ends, to make a clean sweep of Project Chimera for himself, cutting me out entirely. The pieces clicked together, solidifying into a terrifying, undeniable truth. Robert Sterling, the man who had dined at my table, who had offered me comfort in my darkest hour, was a snake, a venomous betrayer. His smiles, his reassurances, his false empathy. The image of him, now tainted by the truth, made my stomach churn, bile rising in my throat. Yes, my enemies. So you're saying he's trying to consolidate everything, seize absolute power, and you're trying to stop him, to expose him and the entire network? Precisely, Thomas said, his gaze unwavering, his voice firm with renewed purpose. And I need your help, Eleanor. You have access to things I don't. You're still in the inner circle, the grieving widow, completely above suspicion. He trusts you implicitly. He doesn't suspect you know anything. That's our advantage, our only real leverage. I stared at him, my mind reeling, trying to process the enormity of what he was asking. My husband, presumed dead, was a ghost, an undercover agent in his own life, trying to dismantle a criminal enterprise that he himself had helped build, and was now trying to redeem himself by bringing it down. And now he wanted me to join him, to step into this dangerous, treacherous world, a world of shadows and deceit, of ruthless power struggles. My help? I finally managed, the question escaping my lips before I could fully process the implications. My voice was a mixture of outrage and a strange, nascent curiosity. After everything, after you let me grieve for 6 months, after you let James mourn his father, after you shattered my entire world, you expect me to just jump in and help you. I know what I'm asking, Eleanor, he said, his voice laced with genuine remorse, a depth of feeling that I hadn't heard from him in years. And I know I don't deserve it. I know I've caused you unimaginable pain. But this isn't just about me or even about clearing my name. It's about protecting James, about dismantling a network that is poisoning our city, our society, corrupting everything it touches. And it's about getting justice for what Robert has done. He's betrayed both of us, Eleanor, in the most profound way possible. I looked at him, truly looked at him, stripped of the layers of anger and betrayal, past the grime and the weariness. He was still Thomas, the man I had loved, the man I had married, the father of my son. But he was also a stranger, a man who had walked a path I knew nothing about, a path that had twisted him into something unrecognizable. And yet there was a desperate sincerity in his eyes now, a raw plea that bypassed my anger and spoke directly to something deep within me. What exactly do you need me to do? I asked, the question escaping my lips before I could fully process it, surprising even myself. The decision, it seemed, was already made, propelled by a potent mix of vengeance, a thirst for justice, and a terrifying sense of loyalty that still, inexplicably, clung to the man before me. The pull of this dangerous game, the need for answers, for retribution, for the truth, was too strong to resist. A flicker of hope, or perhaps relief, crossed his face, momentarily softening the hard lines of worry. I need you to go back into the house to gather the remaining evidence I left behind. Things I couldn't take with me when I disappeared. Things that were too risky to carry. They're hidden in various places, in coded messages, in seemingly innocuous documents, in the digital archives of my computer. I need you to find them, to decipher them, and to bring them to me. And most importantly, I need you to act as if nothing has changed. To maintain your role as the grieving widow. To observe Robert, to listen to his conversations, to gather information about his plans, his movements, his contacts. To be my eyes and ears inside his operation, inside the very heart of the snake pit. You want me to spy on my friends? I asked, the absurdity of it almost making me laugh. A hysterical, bitter sound that died in my throat. Your enemies, Eleanor, he corrected, his voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. They are no longer your friends. They are dangerous men, and they will stop at nothing to protect their secrets, their power, their ill-gotten gains. They will destroy anyone who stands in their way. I thought of Robert's smooth smile, his reassuring words, his false empathy, his carefully crafted deception. The image of him, now completely tainted by the truth, made my stomach churn, turning the bitter taste in my mouth into something metallic. Yes, my enemies, and I would make them pay. And if I get caught, I asked, the fear returning cold and sharp, an icy grip on my heart. He looked at me, his gaze steady, devoid of sentimentality, purely practical now. Then you deny everything. You say I'm a madman, that the stress of my death has driven you to delusion, that you imagine the note, that you're simply a distraught woman clinging to a phantom. You play the grieving widow, the one who's lost her mind. They won't believe you, not entirely. They might even try to lock you away. But if you have proof, if you have the evidence, if you can deliver it to the right people, then we have a chance to expose them all, to bring down this entire rotten edifice. I stood there in the musty, decaying boathouse, the gun still heavy in my hand, the wind rattling the loose boards of the structure, echoing the turmoil within me. My life, once so perfectly ordered, so predictable, had splintered into 1,000 jagged pieces. I was no longer just Eleanor Davenport, the elegant socialite, the grieving widow. I was something else entirely, a pawn in a dangerous game, a player in a high-stakes conspiracy, a woman seeking vengeance and justice. All right, I said, my voice barely a whisper, but firm with a newfound resolve, a steel blooming in my soul. I'll do it. But you tell me everything, Thomas, every single detail. No more omissions, no more half-truths. And if I find out you're lying to me again about anything, then I swear to God, you'll wish you had stayed dead. He nodded, a flicker of something akin to gratitude or perhaps relief in his eyes. I understand, Eleanor. I deserve your anger and your suspicion, but I will not lie to you again. This is too important. Our lives depend on it. He began to outline his plan, the intricate steps he'd taken since his disappearance, the safe houses he'd used, the coded communications he'd established, the small, desperate network of informants he'd painstakingly built in the shadows. He spoke of the dark underbelly of our city, the corruption that festered beneath the gleaming surface of wealth and philanthropy, the hypocrisy that underpinned our very existence. He spoke of the powerful men who pulled the strings, the men who would kill to protect their secrets, their empires of ill-gotten gains. I listened, my mind absorbing every detail, every chilling revelation, the terrifying scope of the conspiracy unfurling before me. The smell of decay in the boathouse, the chill in the air, the distant lapping of the river, it all faded into the background as I plunged into the horrifying reality of Thomas's hidden life and my new terrifying role within it. The night was drawing to a close, the first faint hint of dawn painting the horizon with streaks of gray and rose, bleeding into the darkness. Thomas explained where I needed to look for the hidden documents, the subtle clues he'd left behind, the specific phrasing and seemingly innocuous letters that would reveal their true meaning. He gave me a burner phone, its encrypted line our only means of communication, a lifeline in this new, perilous existence. Be careful, Eleanor, he said, his voice grave, filled with a renewed sense of urgency. Robert is a dangerous man, intelligent and utterly ruthless. He's paranoid. He'll be watching your every move. Any unusual behavior, Any questions about Thomas's affairs, any deviation from your expected role as the grieving widow, it will raise suspicion. Act natural. Act devastated. Act as if you know nothing. I nodded, a grim determination settling over me, hardening my resolve. The grieving widow facade, it seemed, would serve a new, chilling purpose. It would be my shield, my camouflage, my impenetrable disguise. Who would suspect a heartbroken woman lost in her grief of being a spy, a silent saboteur working from within the heart of the conspiracy? As the first weak rays of sunlight filtered through the cracks in the boathouse walls, casting long, distorted shadows that stretched and twisted like phantom limbs, I knew my life would never be the same. The elegant dances, the charity luncheons, the comfortable predictability of my world, it was all a mirage, a fragile illusion shattered by a brutal truth. Beneath it lay a treacherous landscape of deception, betrayal, and deadly danger. I was no longer mourning a dead husband. I was now allied with a living ghost, a man who had pulled me into his clandestine war, a war I was now irrevocably a part of. And the battle, I knew, was just beginning. The suspense was a living thing in my chest, a constant, breathless thrum, a relentless beat against the silence of my fear. Who else was involved? How deep did the corruption go? And could I, an ordinary woman thrust into an extraordinary situation, truly navigate this treacherous labyrinth and emerge unscathed? The answer, I feared, was a terrifying unknown, a question that hung heavy in the air, unanswered and pregnant with peril. The only thing I knew for certain was that I had to find out.